Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of All Blaze No Glory, the podcast. Not quite a Steel Queen special, this one, but still in the theme of ice hockey, as I am joined by Adam Mackman of Ice Maidens, the voice of women's hockey. Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, hi Rambo. So I've been covering the WNIHL for the last couple of years or so. This is my third season. I am based in Whitley Bay, so I cover all the Beacons games home and away. And if my schedule allows, I'll do other games and travel around the country and try and give as much coverage and live streams of women's games as possible. About a year ago, I started a website called Ice Maidens, simply because there was a gap there that with really no coverage, and with the demise of fixtures live, there was a distinct lack of information. And for well, not so much fans, but even the players who were involved in want to see how the other teams are doing, how what the league standings look like. There was literally nothing and nowhere to go. So I started that up so that everything was together in one place. And again, it's a good way of promoting the league.
Cool, cool. Before we go a little bit more into detail into that, how did you get into ice hockey?
Um, well, it goes back many years since when I was a teenager. Really, my sister took me to a game one Christmas Eve. It was at the Newcastle Arena. The what was then called the Newcastle Warriors against the Basingstoke Bison. And Basingstoke were winning 4-1 going into the last period. But then the Warriors come back and won 5-4. I think it's safe to say I was hooked at that moment. It was such a great final period. And it just went from there. And I used to sort of beg my older sister to take me along to games when I was still a kid. And then as I got up into my sort of later teens and got a job, I could start affording to go myself. And that was mainly watching the Warriors when they returned back to Whitley Bay, or some of the other Tyneside-based teams like the Newcastle River Kings and Newcastle Jesters. But that's what got me into it. Then Channel 5 had their coverage of the NHL, which made it easier to watch that. And um, I've travelled over to North America quite a bit and to Finland to watch hockey. So as a fan, I think I was, it's been there since an early age. But then about 8 years ago, a friend of mine's recommended me to do some radio commentary. The NIHL had their own radio station based in Blackburn at the time, and they also had one in Billingham, and they kind of wanted a third one in Whitley Bay because it had the largest sort of fan base, as it were, and the numbers that they could get off the back of it. We just needed somebody to do it. And I give it a go, and it turns out it went okay, and I got asked to do it full time. And so for the last sort of 7 or 8 years, I've been doing live radio broadcasts for Whitley Warriors, and that including highlights as well, done playoff weekends, cup finals, and then that led on to being asked to do the Beacons.
Cool, cool. So, just for people that are not in the know, the NIHL is sort of the senior league for, well, it's mainly for England, but there's Solway in that now. It is and it's more a men's league, but there are some women playing it. Like I'm sure we'll come on to talk about some of the players that play for the Beacons that play in that league. Um, and there's what, three divisions? Adam, is that still the case?
It is, yeah. So you've got the Elite League, which is completely separate for the men's league, and then below that, the National League, which, as you mentioned, Solway are in there for this year. And then you've got NIHL one, which is then regionalised into North and South, and then Division Two is as well. So the Whitley Warriors, which is the local men's team, they're in NIHL one North, which is essentially the third tier of men's hockey. But then obviously you've got the women's NIHL as well, so that's just sort of the other side of it.
And how did you get approached by the Beacons? And obviously it's went beyond the Beacons. Your interest in women's hockey. How did you get your start in women's hockey, and what attracted to you to covering that?
Well, part of the blame lies at your door, Rambo, for that because the first women's game I actually covered was when the Beacons played the Steel Queens in a friendly. It was just as we were coming out of lockdown during the pandemic. Um, Steph Towns had asked a friend of mine, Matthew Donaghy, who was at the time doing the Warriors highlights, would he stream live games of the Beacons? And he suggested it to Steph. Would she want a commentator? Because essentially, these streams do sound better with somebody commentating on them. So it was sort of arranged by Matthew and Steph, and I got asked to do it. Ashamed to say, I knew very little about women's hockey. I'd not been to a live game before. I'd watched the Olympics every 4 years, but that was about as much as my knowledge went. But I did that one game at Whitley Bay, as I say, against the Queens, and it just sort of gripped me from then on. And at the start of the next season, the Beacons were having their first campaign in the Elite League. And again, I was asked back to do some more games for them. The first sort of Elite League game I did was against the Guildford Lightning, again, which Guildford won 8-4. But I think what completely blew me away that day was watching Louise Adams, who up until recently was a GB international, but one of the top players in this country and a fantastic two-way player. But it was just, I've never seen somebody dominate a game of ice hockey like it. And from then on, I wanted to do it more regularly and watch more of the WNIHL.
I'm smiling here at the other end of the line because I've seen Louise Adams play, and I think if you're on the other side of her, she's terrifying to have against you, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly a player. It's like she's got some kind of piece of string on the puck when she's on her stick, and so yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about there. Um, so you've been doing. How long is that? You've been doing the sort of covering the Beacons games, and then obviously, then when did you decide? Right now, it's time to do a more national project.
Yeah, so about 2.5 years when I did that first game. As it was that friendly. We ran about June 2021, I think, when the Beacons hosted the Queens. Over the course of that year, I travelled up and down the country watching the Beacons in the Elite League. So I very quickly got familiar with the other teams in there and the players. And by the time the playoffs came around, that's you're talking sort of May or June 2022. I was going to go anyway as a fan and watch the games, but I thought, well, why not try and do a bit of media coverage of it? I wasn't sure what there was available at the time. There was a company there brought in to film it, but their budget didn't stretch to a commentator. So I basically just volunteered and said, well, look, I'm here anyway. I know most of the players. Let's just, give it a go and see what happens. And I think it went really well. We got a lot of good feedback from it. And it's just sort of grown. I think the second season that I started covering it, which was last year, I was asked to come on board and help out Solway Sharks with their home broadcasts, which when it didn't conflict with the Beacons. And I've done some games for Grimsby and Sheffield as well. So it's just ones that are relatively close and commutable from Tyneside, I guess. And then that in turn led to me wanting to set up the website of Ice Maidens.
Cool. And how challenging was that? Because obviously, as you've mentioned, there's no fixtures live now. I obviously the Steel Queens have come in after fixtures live was a thing, but I understand it automatically updated tables and things like that, and gave you a bit more of a website. But how much of a challenge has it been, sort of not just collating all the stats, but equally you've given like sort of pre-season reports on every team in the WNHL. It's a lot of work to get through. So So how have you managed to fit all that in?
Yeah, it was a lot of work doing them previews. Let me tell you. I mean, it's a labour of love, really. I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't enjoyed it. But yeah, 32, I think I did in the end to cover every single team. Relied a lot on some of the teams sending me information, but most of them I just wrote essentially just the knowledge that I had and trawling through social media, seeing what updates that the various teams have put out there, and just try and put it together, tidy it up a little bit, and make it interesting. But yeah, they do take time. I think they were well received from the feedback I got, which was good. But yeah, it's hard work. Last year without fixtures live was difficult. So I mean, I'm kind of one of these sad statos in a way that loves. I'm a bit of a hockey nerd. Is probably the best term to describe myself. So getting all these results is something I would want to know personally myself anyway. But it wasn't easy. Again, you're sort of relying on the various clubs putting it on social media as to what the score was, and sometimes you'll get the goal scorers as well, which helps. But without the data which Fixtures Live had, it's very difficult. So you are literally then relying on teams to maybe send you a copy of a game sheet where you can again use the stats from that to help. But it's not been easy, and it's been well over a year now, almost 18 months, that there's been no sort of nothing published by the league in terms of updates or league tables. I think possibly what was the biggest thing for me was at the end of last season, where in what was Division 1, the Whitley Bay Beacons were long since champions, so they'd claimed top spot. But 4 teams were battling for the final 3 spots for the playoffs. Now, 3 of them teams all finished on the same number of points. So, yeah, they had to work out like a tiebreaker system as to which 2 teams qualified and which one missed out. And essentially, I think they went off what the table and the standings that I posted. So, yeah, a lot of pressure for that because, I've kind of got to get it right. But at the same time, if I hadn't posted it, I guess there wouldn't have been anything out there.
Yeah, yeah, and there's now, I think is it NIHL stats? Do you sort of work with them at all, or
A
is
little bit,
it separate
yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
event?
we've exchanged emails. Sort of the yearbook which he put out, which is fantastic, by the way. If anyone hasn't checked that out, so I did a lot of updates for certainly for the Whitley Bay teams like the Beacons and the Warriors, and give them as much information as I could about the WNIHL. So there has been a bit of support there from both sides, and I must say as well, the UK branch of Elite Prospects has also been very useful. Apologies, I don't actually know the person's name who runs it, but again, we've exchanged messages and we've sort of helped each other along the way, really.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that the girls in our team certainly love is they feel sort of dead professional having elite prospects, because obviously you're then in the same database as say Sidney Crosby and stuff like that. So
Mm,
it's
yeah,
quite a good thing to have, and they're certainly a helpful bunch and keeping that up to date. So it sounds like this is all a bit of a labour of love for you, whilst it's a lot of hard work. One of the other things that's impressed me though is you not only managed to keep up to date with the UK leagues, you're also kind of keeping us up to date with Brits abroad. Uh,
yeah.
Tell us about how you managed to do that.
Well, yeah, that's a relatively sort of new thing that I've introduced for this season. It had been on my mind a little bit last year because, like, I follow the GB team when they play the World Championships abroad, and you look at the roster, and there's some names on there which obviously don't play in this country, and it's some sort of high-profile players as well. And it got me thinking, well, what are they getting up to out there? How are they playing? How are they performing? And I thought it might be of interest. And again, there's been some good comments that around that. The likes of Sham Jackson, who's at Sunny Canson, and Lucy Beale, who's out at Norwich University, and Amy Headland as well, who's there. They put a lot of updates on Facebook as to when the games are getting. There's like live streams, so their family and friends can tune in. And a lot of the time on a Friday evening, there's no women's hockey going on over here. So if there's a live stream at sort of 11 o'clock on a Friday night, I'll be sort of watching it and taking notes. But to be fair as well, the team's websites are fantastic because they put a lot of stats in there. They tell you just about how many shifts each of the girls play and how many shots they take and stuff like that. So you can take a lot out of that and write reports off the back of it. So it's quite useful. But yeah, I mean, I basically just thought let's see what I can gather information wise from those websites and try and do some updates.
Excellent stuff. And of course, one of those players that's playing abroad was a big part of that Whitley team that got promoted last year, and Casey Trail. And are you keeping up to date with her? I think she's in Sweden now. Is that right?
She is, yes. She's in the Swedish second division with Timra. They're a team that aren't expected to make the postseason, which is kind of complicated, the Swedish league, because they have an initial stage of a season, and then depending on where your team finishes, you go into like a second phase, a bit like if the SPL in Scottish football, where the top six kind of break off and have a mini league to decide the European spots, and then the bottom six to determine relegation. It's kind of like that if people are familiar with it. And certainly when Casey went out there, she was hoping or understood that the likelihood is they wouldn't make the playoffs, which meant her season would probably end sooner, which everyone in Whitley Bay is hoping for to get her back, of course. So last I heard, kind of ended January, beginning of February. She may be able to come back and help our Elite League campaign. But Casey's a fantastic player. First British-born and trained player to be drafted by the NWHL, as it was at the time, when the Buffalo Buttes selected her. So it's kind of a big deal. And I think, she garnered a lot of media attention off the back of that.
Yeah. And I had her on the old BIHA podcast. Incidentally, we had to work it around our Weatherspoon shifts, which just showed you the difference in an NWHL prospect and Liam Kirk, who we also had on, who incidentally didn't have another job. So, what is it about Whitley Bay that makes such a hotbed for hockey? I mean, you look at the rink, and with no disrespect, it's obviously an old building. Sometimes the ice can be a bit bumpy because of various plant issues and things. But what has made Whitley Bay such a popular place and such a great production line for players?
It's a very good question, that, Rambo. I don't actually know. I mean, I suppose, there's a lot of history there. It opened in 1955, so there is the tradition. The Whitley Warriors, for example, were one of the top teams in men's ice hockey in this country, to a point where they had names such as Mike Babcock playing for them. So much like the old Murrayfield Racers, who they're now the Edinburgh Capitals, of course, but they're two very old facilities that have kept going against the odds in many ways. And I think it's probably just that tradition. For example, Steph Towns, who's the Beacons player coach, her father was a fantastic goal scorer himself for the Warriors. So obviously his influence rubbed off on Steph, and that's ultimately why she took up the sport. So there is a lot of that in Whitley Bay, where either children will follow in their father's footsteps, or brothers will, and sisters. But to actually put, a defining point on it to say that is there a reason why, I simply don't know. I mean, I know COVID had a massive effect in terms of numbers, and the junior teams right now, over the last year or two, were very low. It's starting to increase now and build back up, but it's certainly impacted Whitley Bay and the hockey. But on the other side of that, the Beacons have set up an under-16s team, which is dedicated just to girls hockey, which is great. Gives them extra ice time. Last season, they made the playoffs for a first time. And this season, they're currently top of their division. So they've got some future stars there. I mean, some of them are only 12 or 13, but another few years, and they're going to be playing GB18s and senior women's hockey as well. They are that good. But again, these are kind of girls whose parents played hockey as well. So again, they've had that influence.
Yeah, yeah, and it certainly seems, and I don't know if this is maybe a trend that you're seeing, that women's hockey is on the rise a little bit in Britain. I mean, our numbers have went up with Steel Queens since our foray into WNHL, to the point where we've now definitely got a sign of chance to play development games with distinct rosters and things. But Whitley Bay have got an under 16s team, and there seems to be, I think Leeds have joined under 16 ranks. Do you think that women's and girls hockey is on the up?
It is, yeah. It's probably been in the best position it's ever been in, I would say. I think it's kind of a new culture within women's sport now anyway. So it is becoming more popular. A lot of that is probably to do with women's football and the popularity of that. But it's filtering through to different sports now, and it's great to see that in women's hockey. As you mentioned, Whitley Bay there, the Beacons have actually got 3 teams. So they've got the Elite League team. They've got a team in Div 2 North who the Queens just recently beat, where that's kind of for players who are still developing, as opposed to being the finished article, which they are in the Elite League. And then there's the 16s, and as you say, Leeds have come in this year with a 16s team. A year before, Telford put a team in. So I think the first year we were in it, there was only 4 teams. So you can see it is growing. It's up to 6. I think there's rumours that there's another couple of teams want to come in for next year, which is great. And as you say, the more it can grow, the better, because ultimately that means more players coming through and more players then going on to senior hockey.
Yeah, because I think one thing, and this kind of goes off topic of the leagues, but I think the possibilities for the GB women's team, if the game can grow, is pretty limitless. I think they can, they can maybe get through the divisions and maybe get up to the top, near the top group, or just hanging on outside it. And I think we've all got a really good opportunity if we can build on this to make it work. I don't know if you think, maybe I'm being a bit ambitious, but you'll know a little bit more about the women's international game than me. But do you think it's out with the realms of possibility the women's team can really fly high in years to come?
Oh, absolutely. They've gone through a lot of changes. Mike Clancy, who's the senior GB coach now, is this will be his 3rd World Championship coming up. This could be in April. But in his first year, the team got promoted, won the gold medal in Jaca, northern Spain. Last year, I think it was always going to be about consolidating a little bit, because some senior players had moved on, either retired or were unavailable. But that also gave the opportunity to ice some younger players, the likes of Ruby Newlands, who's probably the most exciting young player to come out of Scotland in many years, who's an absolute superstar for the Beacons as well. She was playing for GB18s and for the senior team as well. And although she only got a couple of shifts out in Suwon, Korea, last year, the sort of experience she gained from that will be massive. And in years to come, that's going to certainly help her. She wasn't the only one. There was a couple of other girls that they took there as well. Ellen Reese, as well as a fantastic young defender who's also the captain of GB18s. So they're trying to bring the younger players through, sort of ease them into the team gently, give them some ice time, build up that development and that familiarity, and kind of look at the succession as to who's going to be playing for GB in the years to come. Now, they just about stayed up by the slimmest of margins, GB. beat Kazakhstan in their first game with a penalty shot from Katie Henry, and ultimately that was what settled that game and the relegation places, because Kazakhstan lost all their games and GB lost the rest of theirs, but they were by certainly close margins against some pretty good hockey programs out there, the likes of Poland and Italy, who were both very strong. And I think, GB took a lot of plaudits from that, because, they're fine margins. And as it goes on and they get more used to playing at that level, the gap will continue to close. It's one of them funny things with international hockey. You get a World Championships every single year, but of course the players don't get the chance to meet up all that often. And if you're out somewhere like Korea for, best part of 2 weeks, I suppose, with sort of 5 games crammed into 7 days, I think it is. It's not always enough time to develop that chemistry and be able to be successful. But they'll get there, and they're a talented bunch. Jodie Olison-Smith, who's the captain, fantastic goal scorer, and she's tearing it up in the men's league as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the other things I was going to ask you. There's several players, obviously, in the WNHL that are also playing their trade in the NHL. I think 2 of them are Beacons. We've got Steph Towns, who you've mentioned, who definitely has one of the nicest wrist shots I think I've seen in hockey in the UK, and then Abby Colshaw, who's, I think is she a Bradford Bulldog? Is that?
She is indeed, yeah. Abby's fantastic. One of the hardest working players you could ever wish to have on your team. Such a great girl. Her and Steph have got like an almost telepathic understanding at times, that they're so good, and they were really one of the main reasons why the Beacons got promoted last season, was their offensive output. But Abby's very unselfish. She'll always look to try and set one of her teammates up, and for me, she'd be one of the first names on that GB roster if I was picking it. Great player. Jodie Olison-Smith, as we mentioned before, she plays for Coventry Blaze in Div 2 North, but got sort of an emergency loan call-up to play for Deeside Dragons earlier in the season, which is the league above, and that was sort of unheard of, really, that a female player had played at that level before. She ended up with an assist and got player of the game. So it just shows. I mean, if you was putting that into context, say, for other sports like football, it's kind of like asking Beth Mead to go and play for Derby County in League One. It would never happen. You would never see that happen across football. Yet Jodie has done that, and I think it often doesn't get enough recognition that it deserves, really. You mentioned before about Steph Towns. She's playing for Billingham Buccaneers, who are a new team. And there's other players around the league. Sarah Hutchinson and Grace Garbutt are both at Altrincham. So it's all good experience for them. And it's, of course, it's additional ice time. And when the girls don't get a great deal to begin with, having those additional games, it all helps.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing that's impressed me since obviously the Steel Queens have come into the league, having been in the uni ranks before, is the sort of standard of goaltending in the WNHL. Now, we have had to put up with her twice, and Lizzie Meikle, and she's not even one of the top goaltenders in the WNHL. Is that something you've noticed across the board? I mean, obviously the Beacons A team have got Megan Craig, another great Scottish player, who is almost unbeatable as well. Have you found the goaltending's at a really high level, or is it maybe just me? Because a lot of the time in uni, you're stuck and you don't have a goalie, so you just shove a player in goal. So.
No, you're right. It is a very high standard. I know I'm probably going to sound biased here, but for me, Megan Craig is the best goalie in this country. She is absolutely fantastic. There's been games where the Beacons should have lost by double figures, and she's kept the score down. She's made saves she's had no right to make. I think one of my favourite stories about her was when she was part of the GB under-18s team. Now, she couldn't quite get in because, believe it or not, there was 2 other goalies who were selected ahead of her. But during one of the scrimmages, Ange Taylor, another great Scottish hockey player who was coach of the 18s at the time, she joined in the scrimmage and went one-on-one. Megan stonewalled her, and then, having stolen the puck off her, then pushed her around the side of the net. And I think there was a few expletives from Ange in the best possible taste, that she was frustrated that she'd just been robbed of a certain goal, but she could appreciate just how good that a young goalie was. But I mean, Megan is fantastic. As I say, she's helped out some of the other elite league teams when she's not been when she's not had a game for the Beacons, and everyone will tell you the same story about just how good her goalie she is and the amount of shots she faces. And I think as well, it's her ability to get across a line is incredible. I've never seen such agility in any goalie, really. But there are other top goalies in the country as well. I think Amelia McGinley at Queen Bees is another fantastic young player. She might only be 20 now, but if anyone watched the women's playoff final last year in the Elite League, the high glove save she made for the Queen Bees against Solihull Vixens. I mean, actually, Megan's father took a photograph of that, and it's probably the photograph of the tournament because it was such a great shot. But yeah, you mentioned as well before Lizzie Meikle. I think this is only her third season of playing senior hockey. I think she played rec before that. Last season, she was one of the main reasons why the Solway Sharks had a 100% record, won every single game they played last year. And as I say, frustrated you a couple of times this season, but I mean, she posts something like 95% save average in both games against the Queens this season. When you're talking, 84 shots was it she faced against Whitley?
Shots, yeah, against the Queens for when she was in guesting for Whitley.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible when you think about it, isn't it? I mean, the sheer amount of rubber she faced in that game, and I think we all got back on the bus and realised that Lizzie had kept the scoreline down because Queen should have won by a larger margin. As I don't think anyone could deny that.
Yeah, and I mean, I was been looking sort of obviously with the availability of what you do and what is done by NHL stats as well, and looking and even just looking at some of the goalies that I know the names of, and there's Holly Steeples now playing WNHL 2 for Cambridge. Holly was a full GB prospect. It just shows you that across the board, you've got great goalies to watch and to backstop these clubs. And I think that is going to ultimately make the scorers get better as well, right?
Well, yeah, it'll force them into changing how they're going to approach a game, isn't it, or approach a shot? Because if you know you're coming up against a hot goalie, then it's going to get into your head, isn't it? I know the Queens haven't faced Leeds Roses yet, but Megan Quigley, she's another good goalie in this league in Div 2 North. So she's someone to look out for. I'm going to give a shout out to my good friend Ruth Palmer, who plays for Grimsby Wolves. I know Queens have had quite a big win against Grimsby this season, but again, she's someone who is going to face a lot of shots against the likes of Queens and against the Beacons. Yet again, keeps the scoreline down, and there's just such a depth. I mean, last season I actually thought about writing an article as to who the top goalies were in Div 2 North, but I couldn't do it because who would be first, who would be second. It would be almost impossible because there is so much talent now.
Yeah, no, it really is, and I think it's an impressive array of not just goalies, but there's players across the board in every league. I mean, I'm not, there's players I've not seen, but thanks to you, I've been able to watch little bits of live streams, or I think Leeds Roses have a live stream they do themselves as well. And it's been good to sort of see the different players you're playing them in a few weeks, panic about them. But I think in general terms, it's great the coverage that you give to the sport and what have you. And of course, you did come up to Scotland to is that your first time at Murrayfield when you came up for the Queen's Whitley game?
Oh, I've been to Murrayfield several times to see men's hockey, but it was my first Queen's game there.
And you obviously partook in the live stream as a colour commentator.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you think the tandem of you and Laird worked? Because he's going to want to get some feedback on it.
No, I thought it went really well. He's a great guy, Laird. He's brings a lot of energy and humour to a broadcast. I think we dovetailed nicely, really. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I said to him afterwards, I look forward to working with him again, and hopefully, if he can make the trip down to Hillheads at the end of the season, we can team up again. This time on Beacons TV.
That I'm sure he would love that. He does bring it. He's got a tremendous amount of energy and a lot of terms that people take a bit of getting used to. But once you get used to them, it's good fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So, in terms of the leagues, I don't want to get into the sort of prediction thing because it always feels like you're tempting fate with that sort of stuff. But is it now sort of we've had this sort of I don't know the trailer, the start of the season is the sort of the the early days of the season. It doesn't seem like we've all played a lot of games yet. Is the next part of the season going to be kind of the silly season for everyone as they all try and cram in the rest of the games in a few months?
Yeah, I mean, I know the league did try to change that, and that they wanted to start the season earlier to try and prevent the backlog of fixtures that we get in sort of April and May. But the other side of that is, of course, when the men's league comes to an end around sort of end of March, beginning of April, of course, there's additional ice slots, isn't there? So it makes sense you're going to fit your fixtures in then. But yes, it's when you get in the games thick and fast like that, it is going to give a few interesting results. And of course, some of the younger players are going to have exams as well, like A levels, GCSEs, so they might not be able to travel to certain games. So we're going to see some interesting results. I know you said you didn't want to make any predictions, but I think you'd have to be a strong sort of person to bet against the Queens, not to clinch Div 2 North. I mean, you're looking pretty strong from what I've seen. I couldn't name you another team as good. I mean, Leeds are good, but in all honesty, I think if Queens ice their four strongest lines, they should win that. I think Div 1's always interesting because it's always sort of super competitive. I know Beacons ran away with it last year at the top. They had a 100% record, won every game they played, and Slough lost every game. But the other 7 teams in between were covered by something like 4 or 5 points. Everybody was beating everybody. It's still just as competitive this year. Kingston Diamonds have got off to a really good start, but then if you look at their roster, a lot of them are the core group that also ice for their elite team, like so Danny Newlove, Lizzie Saunders, Kiana Tate. There's some really good players there. Swindon have kind of been playing catch up because they've had issues with their rink, so they're playing all their road games at the minute. But in the new year, they're going to suddenly get a lot of ice time, and it's going to be a tough place to go to, the Link Centre, for a lot of teams. Again, stacked with a lot of talent. Nora Egri, who's unfortunately just missed out on the GB under 18 team. She's a Hungarian-born player. So I think there was an issue with a passport why she wasn't included, but she's one to look out for in the future. She's incredible. She also plays for the Queen Bees alongside Lily Endicott, and those two, again, they're kind of like a Steph Towns, Abby Coulshaw type partnership where they're just telepathic at times. So Swindon are going to be a very strong team, a very good team to look out for. Bristol as well, because they just got relegated from the Elite League. So I would say it's kind of a 3-horse race in that league. In Div 2 South, Cardiff again, they've only played 3 games, but they're yet to drop a point. Peterborough have dropped a point in a draw, but that was away at Streatham, which was a place traditionally where they lose. So they saw that as kind of an improvement. So I think, again, you'd be hard pushed to look outside of Cardiff and Peterborough for the top 2 spots in that division. And then in the elite, well, that's just been thrown wide open this weekend with the Kingston Diamonds beating the Solihull Vixens 5-1 on their own ice, which that never happens. So yeah, that was the biggest shock, I think, of the season, really. But good on Kingston, and I think it's kept things interested in the new year.
Yeah, and a big shout out to our assistant coach Beth Diascoon, who was part of that Kingston team this past weekend.
Indeed, yeah.
It tends to be that Solihull and I might be wrong on this, but Solihull and Queen Bees seem to be normally the dominating force in the elite league. I think Guildford sometimes put up a bit of a fight, but I think that's generally the way it goes. So that was a big result, isn't it?
It is. I mean, Solihull have lost in the previous 2 seasons. Have lost 2 games, one in each season, and on both occasions that was to Queen Bees. They have drawn to the Diamonds in each of those seasons, but that's the only points they've dropped. So 3 points in a season for 2 years running is remarkable, really. But you would not expect them to drop points at home to Kingston, with all due respect to Kingston. But by all accounts, it was a fantastic performance by Kingston, and they fully deserve to win it. I'm sure the Queen Bees will be rubbing their hands with glee at that result as well, because it means that the teams are tied at the top now. It's all to play for in the second half of the season. As you mentioned there, Rambo, Guildford, traditionally, yeah, they are a strong team. They were playoff champions in 2022. But Louise Adams is kind of, well, sort of hung the skates up, really. So they've been without her. They've had to rebuild. They've gone with a very young team, but they're very good fast skaters and very good and confident on the puck. And they'll cause a lot of teams problems this season. They beat Whitley at home in a bit of a shootout, 7-5. It was a great game of hockey, and if anyone wants to watch it, that is actually on the Beacons TV YouTube channel. It was, as I say, a lot of goals, a lot of good talent out there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Streatham as well, on their day, they can beat anyone, and Whitley as well. I mean, we haven't had a lot of wins this season, but we've kept the scorelines close. And if you compare our performance this year to how we were 2 years ago when we was last in the Elite League, we've kept ourselves in games. We're not getting beat by double figures. We're, there's sort of fine margins now that you just, a little bit of luck here and there might prove different.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one kind of last point to touch on, and I think it's quite important that people just don't hear me harping on about this. But you obviously do a lot of traveling to keep up with what's going on in the league. But just for people to maybe understand, talk us through, how much traveling is involved for these girls that are playing essentially in the top level and essentially funding themselves.
Yeah.
It's incredible that they play so much hockey, isn't it?
It really is, and that's the thing that shocked me. I think when I first got into following women's hockey compared to men's, where they get all the coaches and transport and travel paid for themselves. It's, as you say, it's all funded by the girls themselves, even going to GB training camps, for example. The Elite League, you've got 3 teams sort of in the southeast: Guildford, Queen Bees, who are now based in Slough, and Streatham in South London. So for the likes of Hull, that's quite a fair distance to travel down there, even further from Whitley Bay, let me tell you. Our sort of second closest trip, away trip of the season, is to Solihull. And if you compare that to the men's team, the Warriors, that's their longest trip. I think they would downright refuse to go any further than Solihull. But that's kind of a difference in sort of attitudes. I think, the female players don't really get a choice. It's like, well, we want to be playing. We've got to be playing against the best teams with the best players. And that means getting on a bus and sitting on a bus for 6 hours to get down to the southeast of England, play a game of hockey, and then another 6 hours back. If Queens get promoted next season, you'll find that out yourself in Div 1 because that's a fully nationalised league as well. You've got Sol way of finding that out themselves this year as well. You've got to go to the likes of Chelmsford, Swindon, Bristol, Milton Keynes, Slough again. It's some long haul trips. And similarly, of course, those teams have to travel north. Div 2 is more regionalised. So right now it's kind of Edinburgh to Telford is probably the longest trip in the north. And then probably something like Cardiff to Chelmsford in the south would be the longest trip. But so it's not quite as bad, but still it's a lot of travelling. It's not like, some of the sports leagues were a bit more sort of regionalised and you only got a couple of hours travel. This is a huge commitment from the girls that they have to do this. And I think what amazes me is when I've been on the Beacons bus is just the team spirit they all have and the positivity. Even if the game hasn't gone the way they'd like, they never stop smiling and having fun, and a bit of karaoke goes on in the back and stuff like this. But it's just great to see, that the girls are loving what they're doing, and that's essentially what it's about. Yes, it is hard what they have to go through in terms of financing it themselves, and they are reliant on personal sponsors to subsidise some of what they have to pay. But if I could change one thing, it would be that then they could get a bit more financial support because there's a lot of talent out there on the ice and it's just not always gets recognised.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I mean, I'm looking. I clicked onto the WNHL 1 table, and obviously the first thing that my eyes were drawn to was Bristol, which is pretty far. And
yeah,
managed to get promoted, which of course it's well down the line at the moment. You've got to take each game as it comes for all the teams, but it's been great to catch up, Adam, getting a bit more information about various players and stuff. You've obviously got a real knowledge of women's game in Britain, and what you do is so important for, as you say, for the girls to keep up to date with what's going on in the league they're in, because otherwise they'd be nipping my head all the time about how many points we had and goal difference and stuff. So it makes it easy for me. But also just it gives everyone a sort of community spirit, and they can kind of keep an eye on what's going on. And from a coaching point of view, you can kind of see what players maybe stand out for other teams, and try and find out a bit more about them and that sort of stuff. So it really is. I'm sure I'm not speaking out of turn, but I think everyone in the WNHL certainly owes you a lot of gratitude for all the work you do, and I would like to thank you for taking the time tonight to speak to me and ramble on to me as well about this. It's great to have someone with your enthusiasm doing all the work you do. So thank you.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure, and thank you for those kind words, really. But I mean, I'm a huge fan, and I'm not going to stop promoting women's hockey.
Good lad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.